first and foremost, I'd like to welcome Stardust down here at the bottom of the screen. Thank you very much for joining us.
Where am I?
Currently, you're on Somebody Online. You are on my little Twitch channel. I guess you're also live on YouTube as well. But we've got our panel today. We're talking about personal identity. And we do have a walk-on panel right now. I am going to be inviting folks to join my Discord, join the show waiting room, and then come on and join us. Give your personal takes. Those of you that have been here so far, I'd ask you to please stay and join us if you would like to. But by all means, leave, come back. I'll see you again. We're going to be here for a little bit. Stardust, thank you for joining me. We're going to bring a couple other folks on, though, now. And, go ahead. Where were we? Xenogenders. So why can't I be a xenogender? I think that it's perfectly appropriate for me to... Wait a minute. Xenogender? I don't know about that one. I'm going to go with non-binary. I like that one. What's the difference again?
Non-binaries tend to reject the gender spectrum or feel like they don't fall neatly kind of into either side, whereas xenogenders tend to map their gender onto something not included within the typical gender spectrum.
So eloquently put.
I literally found it today on the wiki and stuff, so I'm just remembering a definition is not impressive, I promise. I use the Goog.
Good. Can you imagine doing research
for,
before
non-binary
Google?
stuff is as sort of a utility for trans people. It's a lot of people I know, Erudite was kind of talking about, have had periods of time where they've been non-binary before they transitioned, and they found it at least temporarily to be helpful for them to be able to have that kind of wiggle room and being cis and transition to the opposite.
Okay, here's a question then. I'll be controversial. Do you think part of the problem with xenogenders and gender absurdism generally is its fashion over an actual feeling or substance?
Well, I mean,
my nemesis is here.
So when we talk about these different genders and you're talking about fashion, what I've heard it explained as is that all of these other static gender and deer gender and all these other things are just variations of non-binary. And I just don't know why we wouldn't just call it non-binary.
Well, it's possible that you could be non-binary, but by the conception of xenogender, for the examples we were talking about earlier, with the example of a lioness, or if you identified as xenogender, you could be xenogender and non-binary. Theoretically, you could be xenogender and binary along the gender spectrum. It just seems like this is just a different concept, I guess.
Can I guess it go ahead.
You could theoretically be both, but they're just descriptively speaking, they're different things. Unless you're going to define xenogender as just any formalization of.
So I don't know if this is a spicy take, but I don't know that I don't know that I believe in xenogenders.
That's not spicy.
It's not spicy in this panel. I think our major pushbackers on that left, which was Kid.
Can someone explain it to me? What's the big deal about xenogenders if somebody wants to be a xenogender?
I think nobody's voiced any concern about if people personally want to, right? If
Wait, I'm not a TERF. Will, don't call me a TERF. Stop. I'm not a TERF. Your genders are the same as non-binary. Okay, all right. I can't tell if you're joking or not, Will.
Is necessarily a protected community to some extent, for good reason, in my view. However, there's this weird thing of, can you now opt into trans communities, and do the trans community want to include xenogenders under their umbrella of protection? And it seems
important?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, when would you accept anyone else saying that they don't want to include trans people?
Wait, I'm sorry, what?
You're saying that it's up to trans people whether or not they include xenogenders, but who's it up to whether or not trans are included? Why don't xenogenders who identify that way have a right to identify as trans? And why is it up to the trans community to feel that way about it?
It's completely different than being trans. These terms are very different. They're as far apart as you can get under the same umbrella. So the issue that you kind of run into is they're advocating for literally opposite things.
True.
So it doesn't make sense to include them under the same umbrella.
Also, when they describe what it means, it's just that they end up in a different.
Okay, well, I'll just make my statement. I think that gender as a category is just meant to be broad and completely undefinable, and xenogenders are like the natural result. Like if you accept gender, xenogender is like your baby. That's the case. That's what's gonna occur. And you're like, no, this is too far. And it's like, no, this is what happens. This is it.
I think you can make a case for sort of more modern conceptions of gender without necessarily logically endorsing xenogenders. I think, there are a lot of people that go way too far when it comes to like being left-leaning online, no doubt. But I think there's a real case to be made that there is utility to sort of loosening our idea of what we think of as gender, much more to the performance of gender than some like biological fact. And I don't think that then means we need to accept that there are like an infinite number of genders.
Yeah, we could just be more loose on the binary definition, and like we don't have to start calling people, a
think-
deer. But
Well, you
like
can
like
also- you can-
also like when people are saying like I'm a Taurus and I'm a whatever, and they go, that's why I'm like this. So excuses galore. I've actually met a lot of these people in my life before the extreme left, where they give excuses because they're arbitrarily born under a sign, and then they just it's like their shield as to why they behave the way they do, and they're taking no accountability for their actions. So I'm seeing some similarities within Xenogender. It's like, well, I'm this way because I'm actually this kin, and it's like, no, you're making these choices on your own at this point because now you're an adult. You know?
Can I ask a question that might broaden that conversation a little bit?
Hmm.
I wrote it, so I'm going to just read it. It seems like part of any acceptable account of identity, if it's not to devolve into mere self-assertion, includes that it's something we can be wrong about. We can think we are one way when in fact we're another. But when an identity claim is predicated on an internal experience, is that true? Can we be wrong about the nature, causes, and cures of our own experiences? And if
Yes.
so, should
Yes.
others have opinions about the nature of my experiences?
Yeah,
Should those
that's what we were
opinions be
saying in the
expressed and
beginning.
argued over?
What ends up being wrong and right, I think, is what makes sense and is fair to then obligate others to, or to like expect from others, or what we would consider it fair to like feel obligated to towards another individual. Like what is empathy? What does it mean to be fair to a person? What does it mean to be empathetic towards a person? And I think that like any degree, I think generally speaking, as a society, we don't think that any form of self-conception necessarily justifies anything. I think it's a case-by-case basis that we make these distinctions, and gender fits into one of those categories for all sorts of like what I would consider biologically essentialist reasons. They don't. You can bite the bullet of gender, and this is more circling back to Bento's point. But just to cap it, you can bite the bullet of gender without it becoming an infinitely arbitrary thing, and
I think you are wrong, but go ahead. I've asked many questions to many people who are educated on this and care a lot about it, and I have never gotten the same answer that is not open to constant and like update and reinterpretation at any point in time. I've never gotten a good definition, and the definitions, the one thing that all the definitions I've received all have the same is that it is like a performance. So it's an act.
Okay, what's a sandwich? Define for me a sandwich.
Right. I mean, yeah, we could go into the what's a sandwich, what's a taco, what's a...
This is
exactly
to
it.
your point, right? This is the classic talking point for a lot of conservatives, being like, but there's a lot of artsy-fartsy. They can't even define what a woman is. And it's like, define the table. Define it.
Question. We have to be able to define certain things that we are enforcing with law. So I don't like the fact
to
that
some extent, yes.
Like infinite, borders.
What do you mean by law? Like protection of gender?
Protection of laws, like speech codes, all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So those types of things that like say like, hey, everything's fuzzy. It's like, hey, that's great. Anyway, we still have to live our lives and function. So let's not go there. Let's just talk about something that we can actually, agree on.
Brento, do you think that you might be having too strict a standard on how exactly bright it needs to be? When we talk about law, the most important law document, at least in America, is something that is wildly up to interpretation, that we have an entire institution dedicated to where reasonable people, smart people disagree on what exactly it means. So I feel like, for example, almost nothing would meet this standard, including laws. Clearly, the law can have some degree of fuzziness in its standards, and the country doesn't collapse. So why would we not have a similar standard for gender?
In regards to gender, I think gender takes any legitimacy it has in any regard and gets it only from sex, which is biological and measurable. And then I think it's outside of that, it's up to like, it's basically fashion and personal preference and personality. It is nothing except how you feel or act at any moment in any regard to anything real or measurable or important is only in regards to sex.
So do you not believe then, this is going to be the classic trope again, why is it the case that men in Japan seem to have a lot of different cultural norms than men in Tibet versus men in Europe versus men in South Africa?
But they all share the same sex.
Well, they
That's how
correlate.
you're
So this is the issue with
that's how
gender
you're
and sex.
recognizing them as men when you're asking the categories. You
So-
have
That's the
point.
assumed the
They're-
category, and now you're asking about like variations of the category.
No, I'm not, right? The issue is that most people, let me try to understand you. Are you saying that sex and gender are one-to-one, or are you saying that they're correlated?
I'm saying that sex is real and gender is interpretation.
Okay, let's try again. Are you saying that sex is one-to-one, or are they correlated?
They are correlated, but only sex has something measurable and real, and then gender could be the same thing 1 minute, the opposite the next minute, and something completely new the next minute. And they would all be
So
equally
define
valid
sex
because it's
for
not
me.
based on
Sure.
gender. Sex
Define
is
sex for me.
biological.
So
male
what
and
is a
female.
man?
A man has a penis, large gametes, and can get a female pregnant, which is how they reproduce.
So is Eldrazi a man?
I don't know which one is that.
I have a penis.
Sorry, I'm not sure which one.
Don't tell him. Don't tell him about your genitalia yet. Is Eldrazi a man?
Eldrazi, I think you're a man.
Okay, have you seen his penis?
No.
Have you seen
No.
any of his gametes?
No, I was just looking at his
Have you
face,
seen
I'm
any of
fine.
his chromosomes?
No.
Okay, so your definition
I
of
can
sex
see him as a human
seems
being,
to not map on in
but
any
it's like-
practical way of how you actually play it out, right?
No, I'm sorry, Erudite. I think that's actually really dumb.
No, it's
It
not.
seems
It's actually
no,
like
it's- no, I'm
fully-
sorry,
You said-
I'm sorry, but it is very stupid. Like it's like
No.
saying like, hey, is that a tree? Like, do you see this? Like,
That's ridiculous, dude.
like you know that
It's not
like
you.
it's
Her,
like if I
her
said,
point
what
is
is a
that her
tree?
point is that you have to rely on self ID in order to
No, you
confer
don't.
any of that. Yes, you do, because you don't know if
No,
any of us
human
have
beings can
penises
tell
or
the difference.
vaginas.
It's like
Am
if
I
you
a
were walking
woman or
down.
am I a man?
Wait. It's like if you guys were walking down the street and then like you talk to like a 4-year-old and you're like, "Excuse me, where's the bus? And can you drive me somewhere?" And then someone said like, "That person is 4 years old." And you go, "Oh, I'm sorry, they didn't tell me." Like you can fucking see.
Oh,
Are
no
you
one, no one's
crazy?
saying
Am
you
I
have
a
to act-
woman?
No,
So I'm a
no one-
woman.
no one
It's
is
your
no one
argument,
is
though.
saying you
Like,
have to
you're-
act stupid, right? It's
No,
just that when
I
it
do
comes
feel like
to, no,
I
no,
do
no,
feel
you
like
just
that's what we
no,
are
no,
asked for to do.
Well,
I
if
do
you
feel like we
feel
are
like you have to act
to be.
stupid,
Hold
it's
on,
not
I
'cause
feel like
anyone's
we are being
expecting that of
asked
you.
to be stupid. Yes,
No
that is
one
what
is
it is.
Brento,
Well,
can
no,
you
but
answer
like,
the-
like
you're just
growing up,
you're
I have no.
Wait, wait, wait,
Can we?
wait, hold on.
Yeah, I have no
moderate because
fucking
somebody's
idea
not
what
here.
the conversation
One
is.
person at a time. I'm going to moderate because somebody's not here, okay?
Brento, can you?
I'll step out. I'll step out while I moderate. I'm not going to get...
Oh, is Buddy not here?
I don't think he's here right now. So
What
let's
is
go one
what's
by
the
one.
conversation going on?
Let's go back to
Conversation is
Conaboy.
about
Restate your
validity of
last stop.
gender
Brento,
versus
stop. I'm moderating right now. Just wait.
Okay, answer your
Conaboy,
question.
just restate your question, and then we'll go back to Brent.
Well, it wasn't a question. It's just the idea that no, you don't have to act stupid. The point that Erudite and the point that any reasonable person would make is that if you're saying sex is objective, right? You have a vagina if you're a woman, or if you have a vagina if you're a female, right? The problem with that is that when you look at any one that you might think is a female on the street, you ultimately have to assume that, not based on the fact that she has a vagina, because she's probably not naked, right? You have to go based off secondary characteristics, which someone who does not have a vagina is perfectly capable of emulating if they choose to.
No,
That's
they're
the
not
problem
perfectly
with that type
capable
of-
of emulating that.
They are though.
Some dudes
No,
have some
they're not.
titties,
I'm
dude.
sorry.
You've never seen a
That's like
trans
saying-
person who passed?
just-
I mean, that's crazy.
I mean, I'm sorry, no, they're not perfectly capable. That's actually besides the point. But go
You've
ahead.
never seen a
Brento.
trans person who passed?
like yeah, especially with clothes on. But also, I've met people who weren't trans, but like, I mean, a woman who is so large and had like crazy facial hair, and I went, what, ma'am, sir, and like within customer service, twice
Right.
I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, I had no clue, I couldn't tell. Do you know what I mean? Like that still happens. Like, so why wouldn't it be the other way that you misgender someone when really they are the other thing, and what does it really matter?
Can the example give an example? So
I'm not the moderator anymore. Somebody's back.
So you said I'm a man. Would it help if like my fingers say lady? I have extraordinarily long hair. I do have earrings in.
Okay.
I would just like to say like I'm non-binary. I don't really care if people call me a man or whatever. I don't really give a shit. But like, I have no performative like identification with gender. I have no internal experience of gender, and I don't think that anything that I do would tie any kind of gender ideology to it. So I
Okay.
guess it's just that like when you see somebody, it's just kind of weird to assume. And I think that when you do that, you're kind of just like reinforcing certain types of behavior based on how people look. Like just because I have a beard, like I literally have a beard because I'm doing
You
a
do.
video project as a part of it. Normally I would not have a
Okay.
beard.
So,
Most women
so-
can't grow beards.
Well,
well, that's not
I met a
fully
woman
true.
the
What
other day
about
that
women
had
with
full ass beard.
polycystic ovarian
Please ask
syndrome?
Brenta a question.
Wait, but most women is what the claim was. It's true.
Yes,
Sure.
true. There are very few women
yes,
that can grow
most
Ask
beards.
women.
Brenta a question, please.
Sure.
Okay, so Brenta, this is push on your harsh definition, right? Which is like, it's yeah. So I went to a gynecologist because I had to after 2 years post SRS, right? And the entire time they did not know that I was trans until they were actively looking for my uterus and realized that I was like not, or I did not have one. The
Okay.
entire time I passed through that, right? So would you say that they all were pretending to be stupid for my sake?
I don't know. I'd have to know what the hell they were doing. They say you're. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't know
man.
the answer to the question.
Just answer the
The answer
guy.
is my
Come
genitalia
on.
passes. The answer is my
Come
genitalia
on.
passes to like trained professionals.
Wait, but
I've
wouldn't
been to
that-
multiple gynecologists.
Okay, but if you were to adopt Brento's position, wouldn't you just be a man that has gotten surgery to appear feminine?
Well,
Like,
no,
yeah,
this is the
well,
issue with
every man.
Brento's surgery.
Yeah,
is
it's
it's
not
super?
that.
He said his definition was genitalia and then chromosomes and then like gametes essentially. And the issue is what I'm mapping here is essentially that doesn't seem to be at all how we practically ascertain gender. It seems to be a lot more abstract and aesthetic based. And then after that, right now our cursor is going, and we're not sure what else.
It's like-
because
it's
most
like-
times when you assume somebody's a man or a woman, you're not looking in their pants and checking for a vagina or things. You're looking for secondary characteristics. You're looking for gender
can just
norms.
see.
You're looking for like, not always though, right? This is the issue,
What do
right?
you
Is
mean?
like,
Yeah, but like 99.99999 fucking % of the time.
Well,
Like if
Yeah,
you want to know,
unless,
like
unless these people have gotten like serious like surgery or something to try to help them appear not to be as a man or a woman or whatever, right? You can tell like 99.
No, no one is saying you can't.
Unless maybe
typically-
maybe
That
a
is
dude has
like
really
what I'm
nice ass and
hearing,
he's bent
so-
over in yoga shorts and you can't tell that it's a dude for
Yeah,
a bit,
no,
right?
no one is saying
But
you can't assume and be right most of the time. It's just a
Right.
matter of when we say you're a woman because you have a vagina, that practically doesn't really make sense because
you're
again,
a woman because
when
you're female.
because
and then there's
because
many
again, when-
things about females
well, just
that
let
they
me-
share,
just let
but
me
that
finish,
they are
is that-
women. Sorry, go ahead.
let me finish. Is that when you look at someone and you assume they're a woman, you're typically not looking and seeing, oh yes, they have a vagina. You're going off of secondary
That's generally
characteristics
assumed.
But what-
based on those
so
secondary
your
characteristics.
behavior towards that individual, right? So like after you
So here's-
decide she's a woman or a man, your
Oh,
behavior
Really
changes.
quick,
That's
when you
it.
say you assume, what are
So-
you basing that assumption on? When you see
Oh, yeah,
someone
that's
walking
When
down
I'm
the
saying when you
When
said
you look at
don't
me,
know if-
why
said
would you
when
assume?
Yeah, if I find
Because you look
feminine
like a woman.
traits
No,
intelligent,
No, but what do you
then
mean
I
look like a
treat
woman? What does that
her
mean?
like a feminine.
I
You
mean,
can't
you look
see
like
her vagina.
I don't know. It's weird. It's like you guys can't see like the color red, and I'm like,
I don't know.
well, it's
What-
there. And
No,
you're
no,
like, well, it's all
if you-
spectrum, and I'm like, are you
someone looks
fucking
like a
blind?
woman-
Like, what's wrong with you?
Medically,
What do you
I
mean?
understand your mom,
Hold on, hold
What
on.
do
So
you
reason-
mean?
It's like-
you have to
It's
take
like
It's like people are running.
No one
Like it's like someone
disagrees
could
that
run a red light, and they're like, well, to me,
Please-
red is
This is
green.
not-
And you're like, well,
Brent,
Refusing to
if I
answer the
can
question.
remind
Just
you of
answer
where the
question.
conversation
No,
started.
erudite.
sure, go ahead, go ahead.
Erudite. No, don't let him get away from this. When you say
sure,
someone
Ants, don't let
looks
me get
like
away.
a woman, what do you mean? What does it mean to look like a woman? Because you cannot
I guess
see
they
anyone's
look like a
vagina or
grown
penis.
adult human female.
What?
They
You're
look like
just
a
restating.
female human
You
being who is an
refuse to
adult.
answer the question.
Like,
what
what do
does
you
it
mean?
mean
Like,
to look like a woman?
I mean, you want
the
me to
characteristics,
like
like
write
long
you?
hair,
You
for
basically want me to write you like a book
Give
about
me
what
a
a woman
list.
is at this
I mean,
moment. Give you
in
a list.
general,
You said-
in general, there's
you
going to
said
be
you're right,
larger
99%
breasts.
of the
There's going to
time.
be
You said-
smaller.
no,
There's going to be smaller
Thank you.
facial features.
Erica,
There's gonna
don't
be-
let him out of this.
No,
Erica, don't let him out of this.
No.
But
No,
in
what?
general,
Just answer.
There's a difference this way between men and women. Okay, you define what a woman is.
the weight
What is
to
it?
ratio.
You would define a woman is by what a man is and the differences between them. And so
Okay, what are
generally
those
men are bigger
differences
and women
that
are
you can
shorter.
see?
Men are more muscular, wider shoulders.
There's so many women that are taller than
Yeah,
me.
so look at me
muscularity-
and look
Well,
at
you're short.
height. What are you looking at the differences? Just
She
say
looks like
them.
a woman.
Did someone say
Ashley.
long hair? Because I have some of the
I
longest
didn't say
hair
long hair,
on here.
but
I
women
just
do
don't
typically
get
have
why it's
longer
such
hair.
a hard question to answer,
I
Brent.
don't
Your
like
hair
why
is
it's so
fabulous,
weird for
Elder
you guys to
Drowsy.
understand this like the simple
Thank
thing.
you.
It's like
Well,
it's
you're
like
saying no.
it's like
You're
I'm having a
proving our
fucking
point.
conversation with
You're
you.
proving our
No,
point.
I'm not.
You're proving our
I
point.
think you're just in denial.
Being
No,
a woman,
Brent.
you
I
can
didn't say
cut your
that.
hair, and now you're not less of a
Didn't say
woman
that.
biologically, right? No, but you just
True.
included in your description of how you can tell that
me.
someone is a
I
woman
didn't say
things
that.
that have nothing to do with biologically being a woman. This is just one example of how these
Well,
things
you guys are
exist.
pretending it's like
separately
it's
from
like
gender.
it's like this. It's like I'm looking at
No
a fucking
one's saying
tree.
it doesn't look like a
No,
woman.
It's like I'm
No one is
looking at
saying that.
something. It's like I'm looking at like a dog, and I'm like, oh, that's a dog, and you're like, are you looking at its fucking chromosomes? And it's like, well, it is a big fucking pile of chromosomes, so kind of yeah. Like things are.
But you're not looking at its chromosomes. You're not.
Don't
You're not
look
looking
at
at
me through a
its
microscope.
You're looking at a set of characteristics that make it look like a dog. I could start naming them.
I
three, four
can
ways.
answer this
You're just
for
pretending.
you.
You guys are all fucking pretending.
No,
It's
Brent.
ridiculous.
No, Brent.
What do you think
No,
you're pretending
Brent.
about?
Listen, please, guys, just let me, please.
What is wrong with you? Why are you doing this?
Listen to me. The whole point of why we went down here is that you were kind of laughing at the fact that you're like, these categories are fuzzy. And you said, of course they're a little
You're
bit
saying
fuzzy.
the gender categories
No,
are fuzzy.
stop. Listen to me.
They don't exist.
The whole point was that definitions are fucking tricky. And yes, we can make categories, and those categories are true and they exist, but at the edge, like fuzzy limits, it's not really clear where we draw the clear line. And so, for example, I asked you what is a sandwich, and then we got distracted, and that was a funny question, but it's too bad we missed it. After that, we asked what is a man and a woman, and you gave a couple of definition things of how you would prescribe to yourself to determine if somebody's a man or a woman. And based on your definition, you didn't utilize it.
Here's the
When
whole
you
thing.
look at it, I will tell you what your definition is.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
In your view, a woman is somebody who looks like a female. You're going to base that on breasts, probably hip, like waist ratio, hairlessness overall on the body, but especially on the face, and then a feminization of the facial features. That's probably heuristically what your brain is actually utilizing. The issue is we don't define women by brain, by like facial skull structure. We don't define it by orbital bone or like chin protrusion or even breasts because we realize
What is a cake? What is a cake?
So here's the question.
Cakes are shaped like everything. They
Here's the
look like
question. Here's the
everything.
question. The question is this: you're saying that there is no satisfactory definition for a woman. I don't know if you would go so far as to say.
No, I'm not.
Wait, here's the question: is the satisfactory definition for a woman to you anyone who uses the word in reference to themselves? Period. So it's self-defining.
It seems to be a mixture.
Anyone
So
who
by
says they're a
definition,
woman is a woman.
What is a cake?
What my definition for a woman?
I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Okay, so typically when I'm looking at gender, I look at 5 factors that I would include for gender. So typically, if somebody is a woman, they're going to map onto 5 elements of a gender, which would be self-identity, social identity, like role that they occupy within society, primary characteristics, and secondary characteristics. All 5 of those are important for gender, but you can be missing 1 or 2 or 3 of those. For example, if a woman cuts off her breast, she's not suddenly not a woman anymore, right? So all 5 of these are pretty good. The problem with really complex definitions is there's a lot of fuzzy in between, and that's fine.
So
can I
hold on,
answer
can I-
what you actually were like? What you're seeing when you
Chat, I'm
see
going to
what
step
somebody's
away for
gender
10
is?
minutes
It's
for
the
dinner. I'll be right
it's the
back, okay? Don't go
performance. It's how they're
anywhere.
presenting themselves. It's what there's something that they're doing that you're picking up on. That's just not physicality. It's how they're behaving.
I feel
Whether
like
it be by
I'm
dressing
seeing-
or how they're doing their hair, or if they are or not doing makeup, how they're talking. These are the things that you're probably picking up on. It's just not just physical.
I feel like I'm picking up on everything, and you could say no, it's impossible. And sure, but I feel like I want you to try and get it. Like I feel like I can tell the difference between a man and a woman, and it feels like you guys are like that's impossible, and it's like you can tell too.
No, no one's saying that.
Most of the time you can.
No,
but-
stop.
like,
No,
like,
stop. What we're saying is that, of course, these 2 categories exist. The problem is that they seem to blur over and overlap, and the point at which we're going along and we say, this person has gone from woman to man is not actually very clear. It's the same as a thermometer. We know what hot and cold is, but we don't exactly know the exact point at which we would all say it's now become from hot to cold. But just because we can't put our finger on that point doesn't mean that now the whole categories are garbage.
We don't ignore the categories and then say that hot is cold. When we see an ice cube and it's frozen, we don't go, well, it's very hot. Because
I
they're just
know.
their categories, right?
Hey,
So
you're
we
not
don't
listening
call
to
these
me.
things their
You're not listening to
opposites.
me. You're
No,
not
I'm
listening.
listening to
Okay.
you.
Can I give you Loki's wager? Maybe this one will be easier. Do you know Loki's wager? Because we're just
Just go
talking
ahead
about
and give
Loki's
it to me.
wager.
I
Okay,
love that
so
show.
in Loki's wager, it's just a story where basically Loki loses a bet to some dwarves, and then he says, and in return, they want his head, and he says, "Fine." And when they're about to chop off his head, he said, "You can take my head, but not a single piece of my neck." And they sit there and they try to figure out where exactly does the neck precisely end and the head precisely start, and they couldn't decide. And Loki walked away from his head. This is the idea. Just because he didn't lose his head doesn't mean head and necks don't exist. It just means that the line between them isn't really clear.
Right, because there is no line. Because they're the
Why?
same fucking
Why would
thing.
you say
It's
that?
as you consider it within
Wait,
these
what?
words.
Wait. So are you now saying head and necks are the same thing?
Yeah, of course.
What?
Head and neck are the same
What?
thing because they're
Oh,
part
no,
of
they're not.
It's not them.
Alright.
Let's change the topic.
You're out of here. Forget it.
Let's change the topic.
So anyway,
What else do you guys want to talk
No,
about?
no. Shut up. Here's the thing. Sorry. I'm a dick, but I want to make my point. Okay. But
There you
like,
go. Left, just so you know.
yeah, I know. Well, she can fucking leave if she wants to walk away. Whatever.
She can still hear you.
I'm not happy you're leaving,
Thought
but
she
if you want
walked
to walk
away
away, I wasn't gonna change my
in a
tune.
flabbergasted state.
But okay. So anyway, yeah, all right. I still think these things have meaning. Like we have meaning to the word like adult and child, and we have meaning to the word male and female. And an adult, like male, is a man, an adult female is a woman. And if like, I don't think that an adult male can therefore be a woman because I think they are the implied opposites.
So at what
they are a
point
category-
precisely
they
does
are-
somebody become an adult? Not legally.
That's a great. And see, that's a social
we're
thing,
circling
and you
the
can say
drain
that's
here,
a
you
social
Yeah,
thing.
circling the
Right?
drain.
What does
But
opposite
why?
mean? There.
What does opposite mean?
In that context, yeah, opposite would be like something like everything
Maybe
that this thing is,
complementary.
the other thing isn't.
Maybe,
That's
yeah.
not the
Well,
case. They're both
complementary.
equal. Okay.
What's everyone's
It's-
thoughts on Ukraine or something?
Why?
Let's
Here's
This is entirely irrelevant. We're here
No. I've met you people now.
This is
To talk
No,
about
I
Europe
didn't forget to
anymore.
talk this
None of
candidly
you are
with
allowed
people
to have
about this. I'd like to talk to you.
opinions on my
We've got
panel.
a lot of
Please leave us alone.
Europe is entirely outside of the topic of the question.
Yeah,
I
no,
also have the ability to talk over all of you, and I'm doing that at the moment. I would like to bring everything back to the idea of personal identity. Okay, so again, I like
and
this concept of if I present myself to you and tell you that I am the most liberal person you've ever met, or if I tell you that I'm the most masculine person you've ever met, or the most feminine person you've ever met, like, at what point do we have the ability to define these words ourselves and then apply them to ourselves in our own way and then try to convey these words to other people? Are we required to live up to some sort of societal definition of terms and roles if we wish to try to apply them to ourselves? And who is the societal gatekeeper that gets to choose which roles are ascribed to which individuals? And again, this is the general concept of the topic that I want to get into. Please let's stay away from Ukraine. I don't even want to bring up the topic.
There was a great thing you said there, buddy, that I want to try and
What
relate
about
back
inflation?
to this disagreement that Brento is having with the rest of the panel, where you talked about who is the ultimate arbiter. And I think that this is sort of emblematic of the discussion, because I think we have to admit, at least for people that are on my side, that there really isn't an ultimate arbiter. That at some point, when we say that there is some fuzziness, there are going to be points where reasonable people can disagree. And I think that's what Brento's trying to get at when he says that there is a sort of logical conclusion that hot is cold. But I think equally, Brento, I'll 100% bite the bullet that there are going to be some people within this definition that where society is going to be disagreeing. But I don't think that means that that is going to be true for all people. For example, right, I don't think that, you know, the people on this panel, myself included, who have this position, look at someone like Brock Lesnar and we're like, you know, I'm just not sure right now. I really don't know. I think we do admit that there's some fuzziness and we do lose the ability to be precise and exact with our definitions in the middle, but that doesn't mean that that's going to be the case everywhere.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's always an exception to the rule, but then like that is typically a fact with things, except for like things like math or something, but just because there can be an exception to a rule or fuzziness within categories does not mean that categories can be their opposite, or that things that like
No, because
therefore
we're
all
not-
categories can be blown
No one-
apart infinitely, and all ways we do it is valid. Like no,
I
it's not.
100% agree, but we're not doing that. We're
No,
just trying
no,
to
it's-
maintain.
in this
It
case-
feels like that is something.
In this case, what we're trying to say is that gender exists correlative to, but not one-to-one with sex. So in this
Right.
case, when we say that a biological man might be a woman in a gendered sense, right? We're not saying that the biological man is a biological woman. Like
Yes.
we can differentiate between these
Yeah,
subjects.
no, you are not, because you make sense. Other people who do actually say these types of things and have influence say what you said no one is saying.
Sure, but I don't know. I'm not gonna represent a ghost in an argument, I guess.
That's fine.
But
No, that's fine. But I guess I feel like
Good, dude.
you're saying like there's only these reasonable things. No one is saying that males are female, and I'm like, yes, they are.
well, what I'm saying is that what I'm saying is that in your analogy, analogy doesn't map on, because we're not saying hot is cold.
Yes, I feel like that is the case.
You're saying
You're saying
that's what I'm
like day
saying.
is
We're
night, and then I'm
we're
like,
not
well,
saying
tell
that-
me
we're not
exactly
saying
when it
that-
became
we're not
the
saying that the
nighttime.
two sides of the gendered spectrum are the same. The only reason that you would say we're saying that hot is cold is because we're saying that a biological man is a woman. But that's not fair, because that's not the spectrum we're talking about when we say hot and cold.
But unpack that. I mean, it's the same thing.
Does anyone
like,
here agree
hot
with that?
and-
Does everyone
Yeah,
agree
dude,
with that?
There's a good point there. Like hot is just the cold is just the absence of heat, right? So like, is woman and man on that same scale? Is one just
No.
an absence of the other? Is
No, just because
man
we're
just an
using
absence-
categorical analysis doesn't mean that all opposite categories are mapped on by the same things. Just because
I
cold is
mean,
the opposite of
I've
heat doesn't mean that
never-
women is just the opposite of being a man.
Is the opposite of cat dog? Like, what does the word opposite mean to you guys? I
They're
feel
not
like you
the
guys
Not
don't
the
understand
opposite.
what
It's
opposite
the
means.
absence of the other. Like one is the
If
absence
that's
of
what
the other.
opposite means.
No, it's
No,
not the
it's
in
absence
the
of
case
the
of
other.
heat,
opposite
but
to,
not
like,
in the case of
appreciation and depreciation. It's like they're
Sure.
they're going on two different vectors. There's it's a different opposite is different. But man and woman are
Can
not
I-
so much.
Can I
different.
just can I say
think-
something erudite?
I think the high
maybe
and cold
this-
thing
Sorry.
really spurs like a good way to deal.
I
or cope
believe
with
Doobie's
this
raising his
conflict.
frog hand.
Well,
Please
thanks.
and thank you.
Can I say
Both
something
frog
erudite?
hands now.
I'd
My
love to hear
goodness.
from
Like,
the Doobie.
please.
He always be doing that though.
I got crazy takes.
I
No,
guess
Doobie's
it's
raising
the
his
same-
hands. Please,
Okay.
Doobie.
Okay. Well, I'm just kind of curious because you mapped out like five things you'd look to, right, to determine someone's gender. But I mean, and one of them was self ID, right? Self-identification. So if somebody looked like Brento, for example, right, was expressing as a man what we stereotypically consider to a man to look like, had the male genitals, was fulfilling the male roles or the man social role in society, but they ID'd as a woman, right? Their gender pronouns were she, her, or whatever, and they told you that they're a woman, and they expressed that they felt some kind of dysphoria or discomfort from you not agreeing that they're a woman. Would you reject that, or does this, or because they made the self ID box, right? They're identifying this way. Does them not fitting all the other woman categories that you laid out not matter?
Not necessarily. That would be something where I would basically say, well, it looks like one of the 5 categories isn't congruent with the gender, and so there's something going on there, right? It might just be distress, it might be a bunch of things, but it's possible when we start exploring it that this person doesn't actually conform to gender roles at all. They've just kind of been forcing themselves into those positions because that was what was socially accepted, and when they're allowed to explore it, they would actually almost always choose to be in a much more traditionally feminine role, for example, right?
But
And so,
but there are plenty of trans people that I've interacted with, at least, right, who they look like men or women. They look like their birth gender or the sex assigned at birth, whatever the fuck you want to call it. But they'll tell you, and that they make no attempt to change their voice, no attempt to dress more feminine or masculine or whatever it is.
You're asking about
Yeah. And they still fulfill they still behave very stereotypically like men, but they'll tell you that they're a woman, right? And they like you to identify them that way. So I'm wondering, like, how do we? There's like some weird beep going.
Ace and deuce.
Ace and deuce.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, you're saying, hey, maybe if you gave them a chance to express differently, they would, or they'd find that they. But what if they don't?
They might not.
do we just take the self ID? Is that enough?
So this is where we get into, again, can you just opt into a protected class? And this is where I'm saying, I don't think that we should do that anymore. I think that's how it started with the trans community. And I think that there was a lot of really good reason for that. But it seems to be the case that there are actually bad actors that are going to take advantage of this. Because when we're talking about gender, but specifically transgender, this is inherently a bit of a protected class, right? At least for those who like believe transgenders exist and like want them to be well and medically treated and blah, 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 blah. And so if we're going to confer this entire group the benefits, it has to inherently be somewhat gay kept. And so for an example, for somebody who's never, so this is where we kind of get into the non-binary. If somebody's non-binary, this is where I think the trans community is at. Are they trans? And if they are, what are the people who are also dysphoric and attempting to pass? And is there a difference between these groups? Should they be separate groups? And I'm honestly, I'm not really sure where I fall quite on this. And I don't know to what extent it's my place to say where the community itself should fall on it.
Follow-up question. So it's because it seems like if you were to go with that, right, it seems like you're saying that for somebody to be a legitimate trans woman, for example, they would need to fit the roles that they're told women are meant to fit. And I'm wondering, like, if you think that reinforces the kind of stereotypes that the kind of patriarchal, oppressive stereotypes that society has built up around women.
Did you say patriarchal just for my bingo score sheet?
Yeah, I did actually.
Dude, what bingo score sheet? Hold up, we want to play this game.
This is something that TERFs say a lot, right? That because when trans women are attempting to pass as women, they're actually just reinforcing harmful stereotypes about what a woman is meant to look like, meant to be, meant to behave like. Right? So
yes,
yeah. So I'm wondering like how you would respond to that.
Exactly. And this is what I'm going to be fully honest. And I know that this is going to seem like a cop out. I'm still wrestling precisely with how to answer this question, because there's this piece, there really is kind of two dominant zeitgeists emerging within the trans community around gender specifically that are inherently somewhat oppositional to one another, which is number one, gender is fundamentally arbitrary, should be deconstructed and set more or less a gender abolitionist position. And then there are a lot of people who are more on the side of, nope, there's dysphoria, I need to pass. The whole purpose of being trans is for being the other side and for, like, to some extent following along the binary, but with the binary that matches my self-ID and my like internal experience, essentially. Yeah, these are two groups that are actually currently existing, and I have sympathies a little bit for both sides, so I don't know perfectly how I answer this. I'll be fully honest.
Yeah, because I've heard from women that when they hear that kind of argument, right? They feel like it makes woman like a costume, right? That you can put on, and once you put on enough of the costume, you become the woman. You become a woman, right? And
to some extent, that's true, though. That's the issue. Is to some extent that's true. But it's not.
But the issue is that the costume that's being put on is one built of very negative patriarchal stereotypes of what a woman is.
Yes, and so this is the question of to what extent is gender socially constructed, and to what degree does it correlate to some level of biology, which, to be honest, we also still don't fully know. And so when it comes to the answer, for example, of like this, I wish the science was further along, because I think that there's a lot of science around this that could probably help us answer these questions a little bit better. But as far as like basically essentially biological determinism versus social construction, I think both are existing, and we have a pretty good idea of how both are interacting with, for example, like personality expression. But I think we're being dishonest and acting like we fully know, right? I'd say like some would be on the extreme that like it's fully socially constructed. There's almost nothing about like behavior or like personality that maps on at all to a biological form. And to me, that seems a little bit it doesn't map onto anything I understand about neuroscience. And so I know it's a copy, but I really don't feel like we have the evidence to make a really strong stance on either side right now.
Yeah, I mean, because again, something that I've heard from people, and I think something that I agree with, right? The criticism is that people are too quick sometimes to jump to, hey, this person might be trans or gender queer or non-binary or whatever, because they're like a tomboy or something, right? Or they're a man that likes, ballet or something. Right? They might just be to have more stereotypically feminine interests.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, I think that's I agree that we still really don't know entirely, where the line is on this. But I think that I think Brento has some has a point when he says that it really does come down to treating this as kind of a costume, right? And
in part. Yes, but I don't think it's fully, right? Like, how do we reconcile that gender dysphoria seems to be a very persistent experience that people have had for, like, at this point with what we know with, like, research, probably hundreds of years at least, is like, right, when you're looking at old texts, it's hard to know when they're talking about different concepts, how well it maps onto our view of what transgenderism is. But, like, this concept seems to be pretty repeatable. We've got the Fa'afafine and, like, certain, I forget the island where they live, but, like, we see some level of transgenderism that seems to be pretty consistent, and the prevalence rate pretty consistent across time. And so we also have to wrestle with that of being like, that seems to also exist. So what do we do about that?
What?
Well, I mean, I think that the argument would be that just like mental illness and delusion have always existed, right? Like there have always been humans that are mentally unhealthy, right, and mentally unwell, and it's probably a bad idea to play along with the delusions.
Well, the difficulty, right, is if you want to treat it like a psychotic disorder, right? Schizophrenia, for example, would be a good comparison. But schizophrenia is highly treatable. If you give a trans person antipsychotics, their dysphoria doesn't necessarily go away at all. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not a very good treatment for them at all. The best treatments seem to be about a year of counseling. A decent number actually do resolve their dysphoria, and then others go on to surgery, and that seems to resolve about 80% of their people's dysphoria completely, right? And so, like, this is the thing: is some things seem to be actually pretty treatable, and if they're delusions, you can bring them back to reality. But things like sexuality, that is very immutable. Like, you can't seem to change that basically at all. And even if you give them, like, things that kill their libido, they still are sexually aroused by the same individuals. They just, like, can't get hard most of the time. So, like, it seems to be the case that, like, we can't treat this like a delusion. These are probably separate constructs that are going on. And this is the whole problem, is neuroscience is like a barely cracked nut.
Yeah, but it seems like what you're saying there is that because we haven't just really quickly, I promise. Because it seems like what's being said there is that because we haven't discovered a medication that could be used to treat this, and the best way we know to help these people right now is to go along with their delusions, to pretend, as Brento said. That's what we should do as a society. Right?
And that seems to be the case that when you give them certain medications, for example, giving a trans woman hormones in all ways should make them more sad and miserable, because I'm going to be honest, estrogen and progesterone is miserable. You're moody, you get depressed, you have random pain for no reason. Like, going on E is not a super fun experience, and any trans woman can tell you that staunchly. It's fucking awful, right? And so the idea that if somebody goes on E and transitions and dramatically their mood improves and their life expectancy, their suicide rates decrease, that is treatment, because that is precisely what we're aiming to do, is to see functionality increase and distress decrease. So you can't really say that we're just going along with the delusions. Going along with the delusions is actually where potentially we're getting to xenogenders, where it's like, well, I think I'm a demon. And it's like, well, so do a lot of schizophrenic people, but we don't, like, artificially insert horns into their head and split their tongue and tell them, yes, you are a demon, right? And so here's the thing: schizophrenia is decently treatable with antipsychotics and medication and stuff like that. And those delusions disappear with the proper medication. The dysphoria decreases with the proper treatment.
So this is the question I've got then about dysphoria, because dysphoria is kind of taught through a lens of transgenderism, like, quite a lot. But there's cases where, for instance, somebody was dysphoric about their not being disabled, for example, in the UK. So I think their therapist blinded them as their treatment. And, like, you get those really extreme outliers.
What therapist are you going to?
I don't know the full story about. I don't. No. I don't know enough about the context of the story. I know it just was picked up by the press as something that happened. So, but I'd question whether is that also a thing that you can say for kind of the transracial argument as well. If people are genuinely dysphoric, then if the treatment is allowing them to transition race, is that a hard line that you can't do that?
We need to distinguish between gender dysphoria and other forms of dysphoria, and the fact that we have a lot of evidence that points to the treatment for gender dysphoria being, like Eric talked about, counseling or gender-affirming care. That's a really big distinction here, because ultimately, right, we are going to use, like, evidence-based medicine trying to figure out what is the best way to alleviate this. Even if we were to treat it as a mental illness, all the evidence that we have in modern medicine right now points to the fact that this kind of care with counselors and then the option of transition is the best way to resolve it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, if we had
Well,
evidence that like buying into the delusions of someone with like schizophrenia, for example, would like help them and alleviate their suffering and their,
This is the tweet.
and make
This
them
is the tweet
give them a
right
better
now.
life.
This
I
is
think
it.
we would probably do it.
This
right?
is
Like,
me.
We would not do that.
Do you see this? It's
Somebody
me.
can correct
No?
me if I'm wrong.
No.
Why not? Hold on.
No.
We could alleviate the suffering of someone with schizophrenia by going along with a delusion or a perception that is not harmful to them.
It's like
We
and
have
it's not
not
harmful to
reshape
anyone.
we have not
alleviate their
reshaped
suffering.
our
Why wouldn't
science
you?
and our understanding and our
Just
language.
alleviate their
We
suffering.
would just
No,
all
but-
say, "Hi,
It's
Bill.
me.
How's the
That's
dragon?"
like kindness.
Like,
Yeah, but to be clear, we're not like feeding into an explicit delusion with like the trans movement. I
That
know that
hurts
you've argued with
others.
people who feel this way, but the trans movement is not saying that a biological man who identifies as a woman is a biological woman, right? So like in that sense, it's not literally a delusion. But the reason I draw the comparison is because theoretically, if there was something like a delusion, like even though it's not technically a delusion, even if it were, if we could provide them with the treatments that alleviated the condition, we would. Even if those included in some way, like, I don't know, dealing with whatever their condition is. And it's not even a delusion. So like what is it? You're not even feeding into this theoretical harm necessarily of like giving someone a map of reality that doesn't map onto the actual world.
Are we only
Yeah,
talking
you
about
are.
trans people
If
with
you-
dysphoria, or like, are we not talking about the trans people without
No,
it?
it was like accepting Down syndrome.
right now we're talking about specifically just the
Just
question
be
of
kind. They
dysphoria.
can still fit into
So
society. And
I've
not be
heard this
violent
really
about it.
interesting, this
Okay.
really interesting argument about sometimes non-binary females. If I'm describing that correctly. So there's this thing that people describe before you go through puberty as a woman, you're kind of like a sexless being, right? Like your experience before going
Innocent.
through puberty is completely different from post puberty, right? Nobody's like hitting on you, at least not in the same way.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, you can wear whatever you want. You can even be topless in some cases, and nobody will really care because you're genderless, child, not genderless, but like sexless child, basically. Before you go through puberty, as soon as you go through puberty as a woman, it's like a very traumatic experience. Like, you're
Same
bleeding
here.
every month. You think that you're gonna die.
well,
Yeah, don't even compare. Okay, let's not even compare. Okay, you think that you're gonna die every month. Or at least for the first couple of months. All of a sudden you're getting all this unwanted attention. People are paying attention to your body parts that you weren't even aware were changing rapidly. And so some people say that like there's I've seen some people say that like maybe like some non-binary people are kind of like longing for that prior existence, right? But yeah, so I don't know what you guys think of that.
If I could just say really quickly, if a doctor or a person, like if a doctor or a person and a doctor and a person suspects that somebody has some kind of disorder or disease, a way that you can confirm that if they don't have any way to test for it is to attempt a treatment. If the treatment appears to be successful in alleviating the symptoms, this would generally be satisfactory in coming to the conclusion that they did in fact have that. And is that correct? Does anybody know anything that might discount that?
Well, placebos work sometimes, so
Yo, I just fucking talked about something so fucking interesting, and nobody's acknowledging it.
It was non-medicine. It was
Well,
like
typically
just-
placebos wane. Like their effects typically last for only a couple of months
We do
before their
have ways
efficacy
to
drops
sort out
off.
placebo effects in studies.
And to
I
be
don't
clear,
think-
it's not even that
the
it's not
treatment
even
still
that
works.
with
That's
just to be
still-
clear.
I feel
and
like I
to be
just
clear,
said
with,
something
like,
so
transgender
fucking
people,
interesting, and nobody's paying
Yeah.
attention to it.
No, it
What
was
the
great,
fuck?
dude.
I
No, dude.
listened to
I've
it
been
was a
trying to
good
get that
point.
out.
You
for like
said
15
something that
minutes,
you just gotta shut up and meditate on, though. Like that is a lot. That was great. What was
Well,
that
now I
again?
don't know which question to contend with.
what was that again?
Well, yeah, because it's Stardust, so we're just gonna move past Stardust because
Restate
what
your
she
question.
said.
Restate your
didn't-
question.
I didn't
I know
state
when
a
you said
question.
it, I felt something.
Restate your
She was
brainiac
talking
statement.
about-
Never mind. Never mind. It doesn't matter. Nobody cares about what I say, even though I just said the smartest thing in the room.
I'm
about
preparing
people
for
who are
many
talking
calls.
about
I agree with what
first.
Sparta said.
Like it's not
I
a
agree with
delusion.
what
Sparta said.
It's
Order
just
in the court.
human beings
Hold on, give me a moment. I would love to hear what Stardust had to say once again, because clearly no one was paying close enough attention to the
Clearly no one
important
gave a
things
fuck.
that the important people were saying when they were talking. So, Stardust, if you would not mind, please grace us again.
Oh, you want me to re-traumatize myself telling you about that,
No,
huh?
I'll show you guys. Stardust.
I paid attention, Stardust.
Obviously, be a
show you-
trooper.
I listened because the
Okay,
conclusive point was
sadistic, explain it for me.
that your conclusive point was that it's not like really a delusion that trans people are maybe just like some human beings, individuals chasing that innocence again that they felt when they were like pre-puberty.
Some people
then-
maybe, but no, but
And
there
then-
is
and
like
then
some
that's
there is
that's
like
not such
okay,
a
wait a
bad
minute,
thing
wait
to
a
be
minute.
doing
Well,
as a human being, right?
Wait a minute. 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 Okay. This is typical Twitch politics panel behavior, ignoring the woman of color on the panel. Okay, I see the way it is. Never mind. You guys go ahead.
Stardust, we have a very special and unique space here. Again, there was some clarification that you needed to apply here. And again, this was an extremely realistic and traumatic scenario that you were. God darn it! I told you, Stardust, you don't come in here and never mind.
All right, so Stardust was I talking
paid
about
attention to Stardust.
non-binary women and like how they were treated before puberty and after puberty. And honestly, I think Erudite has a similar story when she was like 14-ish, right?
Yeah.
I think that all women.
Oh, like how I didn't want to wear dresses and stuff.
Well, there's a look. What I'm talking
Yeah, it was a
about
tomboy.
is that there's a lot of what they've noticed is there's a rise in biological females who are identifying as non-binary, right?
Sweet.
And there's
I mean,
and then a lot of
great.
and then there's some who decide to not be non-binary anymore or decide that they don't identify as non-binary anymore, right? And I'm wondering if part of that phenomena has to do with the fact that you go from being prior to puberty, you go from being like a sexless kid with no fucking worries in the world, and then you go through puberty and everything's really fucking crazy and weird and scary.
Yeah.
So
How do you think they're trying to de-sex themselves?
Why is there- Why is there not? Why is there
Well,
not?
I don't
That's
actually
a good
think.
point. That's a good question.
Okay, hold on. I don't actually think that's an insane idea because, so for example, when I was a teen, I was super androgynous as a goth kid, and that was not me questioning gender or anything else, but it was like a way for me to break away from kind of like the social constraints of being very middle class. So we have kind of rebellion stages. I'm not saying that that is a reason that people are going through that process, but I touched on earlier the idea of maybe there is a fashion to this as a way to break away from kind of when you're younger you've got a very constrained idea of what's being placed on you, even if you don't agree with it, even if you are happy to say, well, this is not who I am. There are ways that we can very visually, especially in our early teenage years and formative years, push against that. I'm not saying that's correct, but I'm certainly saying that I'm not androgynous now. It's not a thing that's continued, and I've not sort of become non-binary. So I think there might be something to that, just in how people are trying to express themselves.
Well,
That's
again,
a lot
like
of hand
the
up on their
process of
part.
going through puberty as a woman is a traumatic experience in itself. Like I was saying, you start bleeding every month. You think you're gonna fucking die the first few times, Then you start. People are paying attention to your body in ways that you didn't even know. People are paying attention to your ass that you didn't even know was bigger than it was
my
before.
God. Hey, But how
So
many girls before puberty read a Cosmopolitan?
Okay, just to be clear though, I looked it up because I wasn't sure, but the age of onset typically for most people who experience gender dysphoria is between 3 to 7 years old. So this is way before puberty. So
Dysphoria? Just
so does that
Yes,
include
dysphoria.
non-binary people? Does that include non-binary?
This is so this article I will say is exclusively looking at trans women and trans men, and basically when they remember first starting these feelings, and most of them identified between the ages of 3 to 7 years old.
I would be interested in something that surveys specifically non-binary people, and see if there's something out there.
I can look.
So I'm curious about Flowtrace and what Flowtrace has to say, because I wonder if he identifies as a llama or if he just presents as one.
I do not. I think what Stardust is talking about is a really
That's a
interesting
pinata.
and challenge. Yeah, first it's a llama pinata. That's number one. I think Stardust is bringing up a really
Those
interesting
things
and
have
challenging
gifts
point.
of
And
incredible power in them.
I do. And that point is that if we are going to be going off of internal feelings, right? Set aside even the question of bad actors lying about their internal feelings. If we're going over internal feelings, how is that sort of changed by the possibility of those internal feelings being wrong or changing at a later point? So if someone feels very, asexual or androgynous because they haven't gone through puberty, and we know that that's probably likely to change, well, then isn't that, a pretty big asterisk on their self-reporting before that age? And I think that this is a really important point to understand, because I think, sometimes people on the left can get really carried away. It is a really important piece of evidence that the vast, vast, vast majority of people who do transition do not detransition. I think it's something like 3% of people do detransition. And that's because it is true that internal metrics are not perfect, and that if we do see evidence of them being flawed and we see that playing out, then that should be something that we should pump the brakes on. And I think to that point, Stardust, if it was the case that we saw a lot of people who were female or biologically female and transitioning to be asexual or androgynous before their puberty, and then after their puberty we saw a very high percentage of them then transitioning backwards, then that would be a legitimate piece of evidence to incorporate into our care for these people and consider, maybe there should be a waiting period, or maybe there should be some sort of higher standard for this kind of thing, so we can sort out those people who are transitioning but then want to detransition at a later point. I hope that answers
just
your
like
question.
in fashion and aesthetic, or like
No
person?
I hope that answers your point, or I hope that answers your
Sadistic
question.
is seeing everything in slow
3% of
motion,
people
I guess,
transition back and forth from from female to male. I understand, but not really.
Non-binary.
Well, yeah.
What about
but then
non-binary? Is
male
there
to
statistics
female,
on that?
How the fuck?
Yeah, that's the thing that we would want to see.
find
And if
any.
it was the case that, as you're talking about Stardust, if we do see a significant percentage of people that do detransition because there is this phenomena where, you aren't experiencing these sexual feelings before puberty, well, then that would legitimately be something to incorporate into our care and perhaps put a harsher standard or put a stop on transitioning in that specific instance.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify also, I'm not saying that there isn't non-binary. Like I think that there is very much like a, when it comes to gender, there's very clearly like a spectrum, right? I'm just saying, the only reason I'm speculating on this is that, you see a lot of women who identify it and then sometimes will, not identify with it later. So I just figured Elder Drazi looks like he has something to say. So I mean, sorry, yeah, they have something to say. So yeah.
He him's fine. I don't really care. Pronouns don't bother me. When you said that, it kind of blows my mind, because I wouldn't say that I've ever been like gender dysphoric, just like completely disconnected from the idea. Even when I was a kid and people would say things like, you can't do that, that's for girls. Like when I was 11, I asked for an easy bake oven and didn't think anything of it. When somebody said it was for girls, I was just like, it blew my mind. Like, what does that even mean? I just think that there's like a part of my brain that processes that. And it just it's supposed to process that like everybody else's, and it just doesn't fucking work. I don't associate anything with gender at all. Like, I've learned what people say, but it just seems so detached from reality for me. It makes no sense. So I've never been mad at my body. Like, I don't want to be fat. Like, I've never been upset with my body that's associated with sex, and I'd be really interested to see that too. And when you were talking about how little girls aren't really treated with gender until they hit puberty, and then it's sort of thrust upon them. I think that when you're a little boy, people are constantly forcing gender down your throat, constantly don't do that. What are you, a girl? Man up, don't be a pussy. It's sort of like the weird opposite spectrum of that.
Well,
People have
I
a really
wouldn't
weird
say-
way of enforcing gender on children.
I would push back on that. So what I would say is generally your parents will still put a lot of gender constraints on you as a girl, right? As a little girl. But I think the difference is how outsiders, not your parents, are looking at you, because as soon as you go through puberty, you get those secondary sex characteristics, right? So while you may have been falling into the gender norm, this gender role prior because of your parents, now after going through puberty, you get the secondary sex characteristics. Now you've got random strangers who are now paying attention to you and paying attention to your body in a way that you didn't even consent to, right? You're getting comments, you're feeling self-conscious, you're feeling embarrassed about your body, even though you didn't do anything about it, right? It's pretty much just kind of thrust upon you. So in a way that's kind of scary. I think Pharaoh was also looking to say something. So Pharaoh, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, my parents were never the kind of force one gender on me versus another kind of thing. But as I've gotten older, it's not that I ever was gender dysphoric in the first place. It's that constant I have facial hair, I have them I have a high voice for a man, right? But still you can kind of tell that I'm a guy. But lately everyone's been kind of just like yes ma'am, no ma'am. It doesn't bother me, but it's getting to the point where I'm starting to question as to whether or not I'm being completely seen as female and the male is just not there at all. It's that weird wall, like I can physically tell that I'm a man because of what's between my legs, but what represented to everybody else out there is not what's clicking in my head anymore, and it's all being thrown at me every single day working around here in the state that I live in, and it's causing lots of mental issues at the moment.
That's interesting. I've never heard the perspective of like it's almost like people are assuming you're trans, but you're not. That's an interesting perspective.
I've gotten to the point where I picked up my first dress since moving in with my boyfriend away from my parents because of that. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Like society is like trying so hard to respect like pronouns and shit that they might actually be like assuming people are trans when they're actually not. I've never heard that
Right.
perspective before. That's not surprising to hear though.
So to the point that Stardust was talking about earlier, I mean, there teenage girls are coming out as like non-binary a lot more than like anyone else. Like boys like are not doing it as much, and like it's like the numbers are like almost like 3 or 4 to 1, like in like that area. So like I think definitely there's something going on, but I don't necessarily think it's like the female puberty. I just think not to what you're saying. I think the girls at the ages like of 14 to 15 are just like a little fucked in the head.
Well, women like so. There's this really weird thing with like mass hypogenic disorders. So this is basically where like large groups of people like believe that they have some sort of mental disorder, or a mental disorder begins to like appear regularly, and pubescent girls are basically considered like a canary for like these kind of like mass things. So, for example, like when self-harm. I don't know how to say this other than like when self-harm was like much more popularized in the media, it's much more known about. There's a lot more like Tumblr posts about it. We saw a massive uptick in self-harm, specifically cutting in teenage girls when we in the early 2000s saw like a lot of media pushing forward this idea of like really, really hyper thin bodies. We saw eating disorders, specifically anorexia and bulimia, again spiking in the same population. So there is this weird thing that I don't know fully how to like contend with either, which is that like young girls are very susceptible to social contagion. That doesn't mean that all young girls who experience like some sort of transition or maybe identify as trans or non-binary are just part of a social contagion, but that's something that has to be taken into account of like what is the actual proper like response to all of these things. And it just all this does is just muddy the water further, unfortunately.
Well, I'm glad we've decided
one of
to
the
discuss something so
concessions of, like,
crazy.
I think one of the concessions of like recognizing non-binary as a category is that it is like really easy to identify into, especially if you're like young and impressionable, and it like seems like something that like
It's the right choice. It looks like the right choice, which we should look into. Like, why does it seem like the right choice to the innocent?
And I believe that there are people for whom like they like have dysphoria or
Without any
something, and they end up
bias or all
discovering
this
that that's like
They
sort
make-
of where they feel comfortable. But like yeah, it's really easy, like especially with how much like a lot of like the gender absurdism stuff is pushed. Just like, yeah, I guess I'm non-binary.
I
If
think
you, it doesn't
if you-
mean anything. Like,
If you
until you're in the
overlap-
hospital. At that point, please say something.
If you were to overlap the social contagion numbers with like self-harm and like all the other like trends and fads like in the past with like coming out as trans or non-binary, like how correlated would those like arcs be?
Well, okay, just to throw this out there, isn't this sort of the problem of having this conversation because we have basically no data on it? I mean, my understanding is like,
No, dude, it's okay, man. That's how you fucking figure out.
No. I don't. I'm not saying we can't have the conversation.
That's
I'm
opposite
just
of how you
saying
figure out
that
shit.
Some people
It's
have
it's an
information,
issue.
some people don't, and
So-
then everybody just.
No, I
assumes
don't
what
mean.
they
I don't
know.
mean you specifically.
I'm just going to mute Statistic at this point. I literally don't even know if he's tracking the conversation half the time.
No, I think he's on point.
I'm on point.
No, Okay, so just to clarify, I mean that people want to do research on things on, for example, like the rates of people who either detransition or kind of don't follow through with the full rates of transition. But from what I've seen, and I could be wrong, I'm quite happy to be proved wrong, but that data isn't either highly available or it's difficult to publish. It's got a lot of political connotations. So kind of when you're having conversations around something like, oh, well, what happens as somebody grows older? It's quite difficult to see the rates where people kind of stop that progress without kind of a baseline that we really fucking need in this conversation, because it does actually matter. Because it could be that the data is like the majority of people who feel this way go through in transition. It could be that there are age cutoff points, and that could really help us with treatment. I say from an incredibly layman opinion. And again, if somebody has something else and they're like, you're wrong, please just tell me and send it to me.
I would love to jump on the opportunity to inform all of the panel an educational moment about psychological research, which is that psychology is based. We do super cool research, and I love it. It is based. It's based as fuck. However, to get really, really strong results from psychology, especially because of the fact that we can't basically put humans in vats and only expose them to one thing at a time to connect causation, essentially, we need millions of data points to tease apart patterns of existence and how things are working together. And we also need better technologies so we can like peer into people's brains without like being unethical for obvious reasons. And that means that when it comes to literature on psychology, there's a paucity of data on a lot of things. So when we're talking about the transgender phenomenon, let's just focus on adolescence, which is where we're focusing on. First of all, there's when I'm saying paucity, sorry, there's a lack of literature on understanding development of adolescence. So when we're looking at adolescence, we have a pretty good understanding of broadly what's developing in brains, what are the stages of development. To some extent, we've got a lot of good theories on children from like 0 to 12, but 12 to 18 is a pretty big gap where we're like, well, their peers are more important. But it turns out that like 12 to 18, from what we know, is like the most important for identity formation. That's when your identity forms. But the neuroscience on this is just like not super great. We need more. So like, first of all, what the fuck is up with teen brains? Who knows? That's the first question. Second of all, what level does social contagion have on mental illness for specifically adolescents who are identity forming? We know it has some. We know that young girls are more likely to experience it, but we don't know to like what extent and blah, 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 blah. And just because it's a social contagion, that doesn't mean it's necessarily not real. It might, because they're identity forming, inherently be real to them. Like, so it's really, really complicated. So the literature on this is really weak. And then, of course, any literature on trans individuals, it's a really small population. It's only recently being studied. And you've got a whole bunch of kind of niche groups under this thing that have very different levels of treatment, right? It's hard to have a really good empirical study when you have some trans men that are on pretty mild forms of HRT, whereas you've got other trans men trans men who are on small amounts of T and maybe some hormone suppression, and other trans men who are on a ton of T and are also like getting like surgeries done. It's really hard to even compare these two groups. So when we're talking about literature, it's really important to understand that like the science is really difficult. That doesn't mean it's meaningless. That doesn't mean we throw it out. It just means that like we have to be careful with like prescriptions and whatnot that we make for society based on this. Sorry for the monologue. Done.
That's crazy.
Science is wrong sometimes.
That is crazy.
We solved it. Okay.
There's going to be a food shortage apparently, so get your Jim Baker buckets now.
Wait a minute. I'd like to hear what Stardust's response is to that insightful monologue.
True. Woman's book and Stardust just ignored me and started talking about fucking food.
Sorry.
What the heck, man?
You know what? Not so erudite. You said it so beautifully that I can't compare.
I'm honking all over your Twitter tonight.
I couldn't
You're
compare.
Fucked. It's coming.
Okay, fuck. I can't compare. Nothing that I can say can compare to the eloquent way that you've said things. So.
Yeah. Okay. With that though, I'm gonna actually head out. But have a good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Not So Erudite, thank you again for joining us. Everybody out there, make sure that you guys all go and follow Not So Erudite. She does a lot of very smart things all the frickin' franken time, and she talks to a lot of very interesting people. So definitely go and follow her. Thank you so much for joining us, Not So Erudite. We'll see you around.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Have a good one. I like her. She's cool.
Now that she is gone, let's all scream at each other as loud as we possibly can.
Oh yeah, that'll be fucking different, won't it?
Okay, we're done with that though.
That
So
one's
again,
unnecessary
personal
now.
identity, and the way that we form our identities, and the way that society allows individuals to assume identities. I know that we've moved off of the whole xenogender thing at this point, and I don't necessarily want to bring it back to that. So I will let you guys kind of continue the conversation where we left off.
Where do we
Okay, well, let's start broad up food. Can I identify as a cake? Not as a xenogender, just because.
I identify as cake. I'm cake gender.
Yeah, okay, cool. We got two people with cake. Anybody else want to be a cake?
Cakes are delicious.
I think, actually, Professor Meat, what are you talking about? You're a meat. Just join the cake side. You'll be fine.
Sometimes
You'll be
meat
fine.
is
I think
filling.
you and I are cursed, buddy. Every time we're on a panel, like there's a message afterwards, we could have a really reasonable conversation. It never fucking turns out that way because there's always way too many people.
No, I think we're getting to the bottom of things right now. I want to hear where the cake metaphor goes.
There's no metaphor.
It's not a metaphor. I'm not a metaphor. This is where we're going. You've broken me. You've broken me. I think being a cake would be better. I could have some nice icing. It could be any color. Nobody would judge me. I could celebrate multiple things.
So you're doing
bring joy to people's
transracialism
life.
into the cake gender now, huh?
Be a cake. Be a cake. Dude.
If making you a cake made you happier, I would be down for it.
Dude.
I'm good. I'm glad to
You
be
come over. We'll
accepted.
get some eggs. We'll get some whipped cream. We'll figure something out.
Just batter me. It'll be fine.
I'm gladly batter you right now.
What did you say? What did he say?
He wants to get battered.
That's where we're
You
going.
want to get battered? Like a part of a beat up? You want to get beat up?
No. This is a
Emotion.
cake thing.
Let's
Why
use
are you all making it weird? Why are you making it weird?
This dude wants to be part of some weird beat up club or whatever.
What's wrong with being weird?
I still defend that I will be more normal.
Stardust. Come on.
I don't believe in xenogenders.
What is a xenogender?
Like, you can't say anything.
I think that was the conclusion of the panel. Actually, fuck this. This is an open conversation. Somebody online. What do you think? What do you think? What's your opinion? You've listened to us for like 4 hours argue, 4.5 hours argue about this fucking topic. What do you think about xenogenders?
So personally, again, like the concept of non-binary, the concept of xenogender, I understand where gender abolitionism is ideally moving toward a state where society is not forcing people to conform to gender roles based upon biological traits, where xenogenders seems to bring a level of absurdity into the gender argument, and you have to already be past the essential argument of not holding people to these gender roles to essentially abolish gender entirely, to entertain this idea of a xenogender. And by entertaining it, you're kind of prolonging the idea of gender and fighting against this gender abolitionist take. It appears that the gender abolitionist take is the more based take in most people's opinions. And I think that generally speaking, I am of that opinion as well. There are a number of people that are trying to preserve the gender concept and identity as a whole. And I think that that is a respectable position to take as a whole. Again, I am still not 100% sure. Okay, here's something for you. I was in another conversation earlier, and with a certain Death of Certainty Wick and Ginger Ramoth, and the idea came up that you have a person that on Twitter seems to behave in one particular way, and they seem to be maybe not in good faith, or maybe a little bit racist, or a little bit upsetting, or something like that. But in their general day-to-day, when you actually interact with them, when you confront them on a panel, they seem to walk away from these statements. And at what point do you consider them to be in bad faith, or a liar, or actually telling the truth on Twitter? And this also kind of ties into the idea of, Does someone speak the actual truth when they are inebriated and drunk and have no inhibitions? Or are they inebriated and drunk and not speaking anything logical that they shouldn't be held accountable for? Which, by the way, hold on, wait a second. Not Sweary, I just rated me with like a whole mess of people. Thank you guys so much for coming by. I'm somebody online. If you guys are into the panel, if you guys enjoyed the panel, please do me a favor, drop me a follow. That way you can be around for the next panel. Right now we're doing an open panel. You guys can join the Discord, !Discord, join the Discord and hop onto the panel if you guys have something that you guys feel needs to be contributed. Thank you guys so much for being
There's
here.
people waiting.
But again, I do want to ask again where we were on this, that like at what point do I get to look at somebody and go, oh, I know that person. I don't care what they say anymore. I know exactly who they are. I've seen them at their worst. I've seen them at their best. I know everything about them. Versus, I don't want to say giving someone another chance, but like looking at them and taking them at their word that they are who they say that they are. Does any of that make any sense?
The point where they prove that they're not going to fuck you over.
Yo, thank you for the raid. Thank you so much for the raid. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Hey, sorry, self-rated you from. Thank you so much. It's very kind of you. Okay. Sorry.
And morals to do something. I think until people do that, it is actually very hard to trust them. And it is very hard to say you know who they are. Like, people change over time as well. That's why, it's not just, marriages don't just break down because suddenly one day somebody wakes up and they look over and they're like, holy shit, what was I thinking? There is, change over time for people. But generally speaking, if someone has decent integrity, and I think this is why certain politicians survive far better than others. So, like in UK, Corbyn, I think Corbyn survived really well because he's seen as somebody with an awful lot of integrity. And actually, I think Corbyn's biggest fall was having to compromise a lot of that integrity during his time as Labour leader. But that's aside. I think with the case of kind of genders and everything else, I don't think that you as a person can turn to somebody else and go, I know exactly how you feel and I know exactly how you are identifying, because truthfully you can't be in someone's head. You can't see someone's beetle inside their box. But I think reasonably within a society we can say what we're happy to accept and what we're happy not to accept, because a society is collective, it's not individualistic.
Or like I said earlier, with most people wanting to automatically go assuming, even though you've never met a person or even known that this person existed until, like, me working at a gas station. Half of those people I've never known existed. You could have just been some random thought that came into my mind as a character I was making for a book or something. Don't just automatically go assuming somebody's this way or that way without, trying to. I guess it's most people assume in the wrong way, as it comes out wrong to most people. Like me being autistic, it's another thing that adds to a level of this weirdness in my head, that it's, even though technically I may say something to you, I may, see you as this way, I may not mean it as being rude, but it may come out rude to you, if I'm explaining it correctly.
Yeah.
Because how I'm seeing, because like on my end, how I see people is different from what they actually are or how they feel without knowing them or have ever been around them, knowing that they exist, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I would also like to reiterate my original and opening points that both I'm not sure any of you exist, and I'm sort of starting to refuse to believe that I exist. And I think that this panel has hardened me to my existential solipsistic crisis, which may be an arc. I think I might make it an arc. That seems like a fun way to spend an afternoon.
Well, speaking of which,
anybody else hear cake noises?
Yeah, speaking of which, I'm going to say good night to everybody, and good luck not existing in a few seconds when I don't see you guys anymore. Good luck out there.
Thank you so much for being here. Everybody out there, please do me a favor and go follow Professor Meat. That way we can make sure that we all continue to exist, because apparently we're only going to be here as long as he has a Twitch channel. But where were
Don't
we
turn
on
us
We
off.
don't even exist anymore, guys.
Now we can do solipsism. That sounds fun.
Can I just say
Okay.
real quick?
Actually, genuine question.
Can I just
Go
say
on.
one thing? On free will, and if we exist, if you can't tell, the answer is that we have free will and we do exist. Because if you can't tell,
Do we?
then what's the damn difference, really?
Oh yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that's just like the base of
Just
the
wanted
like
to end any
causality
existential
argument. as well.
crisis out there.
No, it's fine. I mean, either like
Existential
if
crisis,
the
you don't
universe
exist, you
is
can't see.
yeah, well, I mean, like if the universe is all just a mathematical equation, everything is like mover to movement kind of thing, then ultimately everything right down to the most complex things, to the neurons bursting in my brain, to the words that I'm speaking now, was predetermined just along a formula since the dawn of existence, and free will is an illusion. That said, if that is the case, it really doesn't fucking matter. And if you don't exist, like honestly, this is the problem with the free will
Dude,
or
are you
the
a
like brain in a
nihilist?
jar
Jesus
debate.
Christ.
Like it just doesn't. Well, no. I don't mean null. Well, I don't mean nihilist at all. I think nihilism is the idea that like kind of nothing matters and that's terrible
I
and
know
like
you're
we should be
joking,
sad. But
dude.
like I'm an existentialist. Nothing matters. You should be happy about it. We are, in my opinion, we are totally free, and the only thing that matters to us is the consequences. That's the only thing you have to live with. But yeah, people should just be happy. Life's fucking awesome.
That's
Like
good perspective.
how infinitesimally small is the chance of us even existing? People should be pretty fucking happy that they're around. I think.
Thanks for telling
If
me I
indeed
should
we
be
exist,
happy.
You should be
you
happy.
should be
You
happy.
have to.
Well,
It's mandatory
yeah,
That's
you
a
you
owe it
on this
to us.
you have.
right now.
It's an
You
emotional.
look good, bro.
I didn't care
You look
before,
good.
but now I'm really invested in you being happy. That's going to be my new mission. I am
Can I ask
really
you a
fucking
question?
tired. I'm sorry.
Yeah. All right, give me a little bit of rope here. This is touching on an example that you gave earlier that's sort of relating back more to the discussion about transgender identity. Just give me a little bit of rope here, because it's a bit of a silly hypothetical.
Okay.
I want you to imagine, right, we've got a guy named Bob, and he is legitimately schizophrenic, and he believes there are dragons around. And based off of the best medical evidence that we have, the best way to alleviate his symptoms and to improve his quality of life and the quality of life around of people around him, because he's going crazy, he's screaming, would be to actually say, yeah, we see the dragons too. And we were quite certain of this, right? Reasonably certain to the point where whatever like percentage bar we are for other medical treatments. Would you say that would be the correct step moving forward, or would you say that it is better to maintain the truth at the detriment of like the patient and the people around them?
You maintain the truth. That person needs extreme personal care, and their physician or the person looking after them may not, or may affirm or unaffirm the dragon fantasy as is medically necessary. That's it.
Well, when you
What
say
if they're
medically
totally
necessary,
fine? That's like all we can
That's
do for them.
That's like
Why?
saying like,
outside of
hey,
that, just like-
tell them there's dragons, and they'll stop like stabbing themselves in the stomach.
Ooh, why? Why would
Did your mic cut out there? I think
Yeah,
so.
your
Yeah.
microphone just stalled, man.
I think it's just like
Can you hear me?
casual.
What if they
Yeah.
just see
Whatever
dragons?
Okay,
Well,
what I
and
said
they're
is,
cool
let me finish my point. Let me finish my point. I guess I would say, if someone is suffering from a delusion like that, you do not change the general knowledge of the public. You would treat them specifically, and then you would affirm or deny the dragons only like as in like a meta.
Chat, I deserve super chats. I am just saying, I deserve super chats. I did so much content for you guys today, and there's only going to be more content for you, so I deserve super chats and stuff. I'm just saying, I love you. Please give me super chats. Thanks.
Delusions, axiomatically, even if we can't actually point, because I think unlike other examples, if we all start saying that there are dragons around, I don't think that's going to really cause any harm to us. It's only a question of
It will cause harm to us.
No,
In what way?
we know that there's not dragons around. How is it going to harm us?
Because you will have to act as if there are to keep up the lie.
Do you not lie to anyone ever?
I do lie to people sometimes.
Also,
Yeah.
she's saying that the dragon can interact with you.
How
The
is that-
dragon must not be able to
Dysphoria
see
really a
you.
delusion?
How
I
is
don't know
lying?
what's-
How is being
what's
okay with
delusional
lying
about gender
different than like
dysphoria?
not being?
Nothing's delusional
It's
about
just
it. But
being
what I'm trying
polite,
to
but
ascertain
I'm
is
Such content, much stardust. Thank you, Mo Diggity. I appreciate you.
What are you pretending when someone with gender dysphoria is presenting as like a woman, but they're assigned male at birth? Like, what's
I'm
the
pretending
pretend there?
that a male can be a woman, and that woman does not mean female exclusively. That's what it means.
Well, I don't understand though, because
I'd rather go
as
back
far as I'm aware,
No.
a trans woman with gender dysphoria, again, wouldn't say that they're biologically female. They would just say,
People
I
are
prefer
saying
to-"
that. That is the debate now. So, like, I'm sorry. That's what people say
What
now.
do you?
And if you
People don't
disagree,
say
then and that's
that.
fine. But tell me, does no one else say that? Does no one think that?
People,
If that is
I
the
don't
case,
think
hold on,
I
wait.
don't think
If
most
that is
trans
the
people
case,
say
I think
I'm
that's
a
more of a niche
biological
position
woman.
than you're making it out to be.
Anyway,
no, I don't think it is. I think when types of things happen, like men being put in women's prisons that can endanger women.
Oh, hi, Nick. I have some questions. Are you still around?
Well, what's
That's
more
like you'll do
irresponsible
even
is
put people in danger to pretend you're a good person.
well, what's
That's
more
terrifying.
irresponsible is putting trans women in men's prison where they're much more likely to be
Oh.
assaulted. I mean,
I-
that's